All right, and we are live. I'm so excited to have our first of two lives today, actually. This is exciting. I'm here with Michelle as one of our speakers on the Teacher Success Summit, and we're going to be talking a little bit about emotional connection and some really great stuff. But before we get into that, Michelle, I'd love for you to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about you and what you do.
Absolutely. I'm Michelle Trujillo, and I'm so excited to be here. And I actually was glad I stopped my little dancing before we went live, because that intro music, I wonder how many people are out there with me just wanting to. So thank you for that, Chuck. I am a former teacher and principal. I spent 25 years in the realm primarily of alternative education, and my heart still lives with my students. Today, I serve as an author and a speaker, professional learning facilitator, but really my passion still is just encouraging people and primarily educators in my work today to know that we are igniters of hope, and our students and their families and our colleagues really need for us to serve in that role more today than ever before. So when I think about who I am as a professional, I am a person with hopes to just inspire that in others and keep it alive in myself as well. I mean, all of us as educators, we know we're igniters of hope, but sometimes that's challenging, right? When we're in a place in our own lives that sometimes can be helpless and hopeless. This year more than ever before. And so, my heart is just open to give. That's who I am.
Okay, and I love that, right? I think that is that's cool, and it's very true. And I think also, like you had said, now more than ever before, it is essential that we kind of really talk about what we're going to talk about today to kind of help everyone through this time and then moving forward as well. And that's why I was excited about this topic. Which we were talking about, called emotional connection. I'd love for you to talk a little bit more on that. What does that mean exactly when we say emotional connection? How will that help teachers during this time? And kind of how would you define that?
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. It seems so simple, emotional connection. We spent a lot of time in education, or I know I did prior to the pandemic, really talking about the importance of kinesthetic connection, connecting physically. We think about our handshakes and the high fives and what that does with, release of serotonin and dopamine in the brain, and how that helps us to be more productive, students and teachers as well. Today, that kinesthetic connection, it's not safe. And so emotional connection, being that connecting with the heart, it is the way in which we connect with one another that brings humanity into the relationship. To me, that's emotional connection. And that today is so incredibly important. Our mental health and the mental health of our students, their families, our colleagues depend on it.
I agree. And I think that it's so important for us to kind of tackle this particular topic just because of that, right? It's so important and so crucial. And I guess I would say, though, a lot of times when I think about this and when I think about this topic, and it's kind of like, well, okay, I understand that this is important and it is crucial, but how do I go about doing that, right? Like, how do I have an emotional connection? How do I take care of myself, or how do I do what's needed to be done in order for this to work? And I know we were chatting about a couple of strategies, and I'd love to kind of dive right in with your first strategy, whichever you'd like to kind of talk about first. What would you say would be a great strategy to kind of dive into this topic?
Yeah, well, I do have 3 strategies, and I want to talk about them, but I think it's crucial to say first that when we talk about emotional connection, I think we need to talk about our way of being. And I do the same thing. I'm a huge proponent, as you know, of social emotional learning. In fact, my book, Start with the Heart, Igniting Hope in Schools Through Social Emotional Learning. That's a way of being too. We often think of a curriculum or of a lesson that we're teaching. But when we talk about emotional connection today, I really want to look at it through the lens of our way of being. So that first strategy, when we think of emotional connection, I want us to think about the importance of choosing our words intentionally. We've got to choose the words that we use with intention. And we can start with something as simple as this. I want you to think about, how often do we hear, you turn on the news, what do you hear? Social distancing. We need to social distance. And I think we can flip that and start using, as educators, let's emphasize the word physical distancing, because that's what we're doing.
Mhm.
We're trying to be responsible, right? An SEL skill, responsible decision making. We need to keep physical distance, but we need emotional and social connection more today now than ever. So just that word choice will help us to emotionally connect. The other thing I think it's important that in these times today we have to think about, many of us, whether you're primarily, I guess, if you're in the classroom, and some of you are teaching a hybrid model. I've heard you say, Chuck, that you're getting ready to start back with a hybrid model. When you go back to do that one-on-one teaching, you're going to be wearing a mask. And we express so much. I mean, just look at me. I'm all over the place, but so much is in my smile. And so if I've got a mask on, we need to be able to choose words as we're talking to our students and as we are talking to our colleagues that actually puts actual language to what we're feeling. Does that make sense? To be able to say, I am so happy to see you, and I am smiling from my heart, even though you can't see it behind this mask. I hope you can see it in my eyes, you know?
Yeah, and I think that's something to really kind of think about, because I've never thought about that. Where I think when we wear a mask, we're wearing it, but we don't think necessarily that we almost have to explain what we're feeling because they can't see it, right? So I like that. Even to tell I'm thinking of myself with the kids. Even something to tell them. I'm so happy that you are here. Right. Normally when they come in, you're smiling, they can kind of grasp that. But to tell them essentially what you're feeling behind the mask, because they can't see it, is so important.
Yeah. Well, and even to validate or draw attention to the elephant in the room, we are wearing masks. So we're going to have to talk more. We're going to have to be more intentional about sharing what we're thinking, what we're feeling as we move forward. And we've got to remember, as educators, we model that, right? So if we are putting words to our feelings, it's going to help our students do the same.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that it's key. So choosing our words intentionally. And I think even without the masks on, with choosing words intentionally, I think is such an important thing to remember, right? But even more so now in our current situation, because it can be very frustrating. I know for me, teaching, with a mask on all day is going to be difficult, because you're right. You can't, it's hard to express yourself that way. It's hard to have the kids understand it. And it's also difficult to see what the kids are feeling, right? We can't really genuinely tell. So that's another great skill we can kind of teach them as well. For them to choose, by modeling it, we can essentially teach them as well. I love it. What would be another strategy when it comes to emotional connection that you would say would work well?
Okay, the next strategy really piggybacks right off of this choosing words intentionally, and it's to use expressive body language. And again, I think we've got to go back to, I'm trying to be in the moment that what we're dealing with right now and what kids are feeling right now as they're walking through the halls at school or coming into your classroom. And the mask it's important. It's responsible. It always goes back to those social emotional learning competencies. Responsible decision-making is one of them. Self-management is another. Wearing our masks and wearing them properly, it's important. But as a result, we've got to be able to use everything else that we have to let our students and our colleagues know how we're feeling, what we're doing, what we're going to do, that planning ahead. We read so much in a person's face. So to be able to use our eyes, I naturally talk with my hands, but to do that more often, to write things down, use more visuals, this is important as well. And I talk a lot, especially to educators who are working with younger children. you're going to have to lower your body, get at their eye level. So not only being expressive to show your passion for what you're doing, the excitement of being in school, even to articulate and show I'm a little nervous too, doing that close, but we're here together. We're open. We're going to learn together. We're going to grow together. And for those little kids to get down on your knees and get at their eye level and be able to talk to them on their level is important as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I personally teach middle school. And one thing, some of them are actually eye level with me, but
I bet.
But I like the eye level thing, because even with eye contact, right, making that eye contact with them right away. Sometimes I find in middle school, I will have a eye, right? So kind of move away or sit all the way in the back and things like that. But I'm very intentional, kind of like what you had said. If they're in a desk or at a table, I never will stand over them. I kind of will kneel, and so I'm eye to eye with them and making eye contact. And what I found is the more that I do that, just over time, they're then returning that. They're just making eye contact with me. No longer are they kind of shying away. And I find that for whatever reason, maybe in middle school, they look at it as a sign of respect or maybe a sign of caring. I'm not sure. But I think that you're right. I think that getting down on their level, whether it's, they're at a table and I'm kneeling down, or they're really little and we get down there, and being expressive with our body language. I'm one that tends to talk with my hands as well. But even now, I think, which is so important in the hybrid setting, if we're teaching and we're teaching to some kids on the computer screen, some kids here, to be to show that expressive body language shows excitement, shows some great stuff. So I'd agree there.
You think back to the teachers you remember, when you were a student, the teachers that demonstrated passion, the teachers that you really know or knew at the time cared for you. That old saying of kids don't care what we know till they know that we care. Well, seeing in us our enthusiasm, not just for life, not just for our teaching profession, vocation, subject, but for them as human beings. They see that in the way in which we interact with them.
I agree.
And they feel it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's all kind of part of that emotional connection, right? So, and overall, it will help us as teachers when we make that emotional connection, because everything kind of flows a little bit better then as well. So, all right, cool. So we've talked about a couple of things, choosing our words intentionally, which is so important, especially now when, that we can't express ourselves with a smile as much behind a mask, but choosing the words to let the kids know exactly how we feel. I love that. Using expressive body language, of course, is key, especially for people like you and I who talk with our hands, but even so, some other ways of doing that. What would you say is your third? Because I know we're going to just talk about 3 strategies tonight. What would your third strategy be?
Yeah, you've already in your summit, we've heard a lot about this yesterday in particular, but it's that idea of practicing empathy in this moment that we find ourselves in this year because of this global pandemic, because of this long overdue call to action, really, truly call to action to address the racial inequities within the educational system, within society at large as well. But we've got to practice empathy. When we practice empathy, we're seeking to understand. I think oftentimes people get empathy confused with sympathy. And we have to remember that this might be the same storm. You think about COVID-19, we're all in the same storm. You hear people say, we've got to remember we're in different boats. I heard that from someone else. I'm stealing it. I don't know who said it, but the reality of it, the authenticity of it, we've got to keep that in mind. Some people are out there in these luxury ocean liners with all these amenities, everything at their disposal. Some of us are in little tugboats. We have what we need, but we're just getting by. And it's tough right now. It is tough. And some people are in these, little broken down rowboats and water's pouring over the side. And we've got to ask ourselves, what type of havoc is this storm wreaking in other people's lives? We don't know. So when we practice empathy, we seek to understand. Empathy doesn't say, I know, I get it, it's hard. Empathy says, I really don't know exactly what you're going through, but I'm right here. I'm with you. and I want to understand. So can you tell me more? You know, empathy really is that active compassion, whereas sympathy tends to be more like that pat on the shoulder saying, you'll get through this, or I've been there too, I understand. And you want to say, no, you don't. You're not walking in my shoes.
Exactly.
So I think just being authentic ourselves, again, it goes back to choosing our words authentically and intentionally to be able to say, I don't get it. You know, I can't tell you the number of students. You know, I worked in the alternative ed world, and so many of my students were up against all odds. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes they would say, T, you don't get it. And I'd say, you are absolutely right. I don't. Yeah. But I want to. So help me. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. That's empathy. Just that seeking to understand one another. And I also want to say, Chuck, this, that when we think about emotional connection, you know, two hot topics in education today are SEL, social emotional learning, and self-care. Mm-hmm. I heard one of your speakers talk about how no matter where she goes across the nation, self-care is a hot topic. And I would agree. I'm finding the same thing. Doesn't matter where I go. But when we practice as a way of being emotional connection, that in fact is a way to take care of ourselves. Mm-hmm. Because as we're practicing empathy, we're building relationships, right? As we practice empathy, we are we are bringing that ability within ourselves to open our hearts to one another. And when we open our hearts, we tend actually, even though sometimes it's hard and you hear things that are difficult to hear, we also though tend to feel better about just being able to be there for another. That in fact can help us, you know?
No, I agree. And I think, and you're right. I think that it's almost like a mindset, right? And you're so right when you said it seems like a hot topic, which is funny. With the summit we have tomorrow is SEL and the next day self-care, right?
Self-care, yeah.
The next 2 days coming up, and you're right. I mean, I've had the privilege to watch the sessions, and they're awesome, but they're very well needed, right? I think in this time, because the reason why these are hot topics is because it's what people are seeking, right? It's that ever present, you know, overwhelm that tends to be around us, and it's how do we take care of ourselves? How can we help the kids take care of themselves, and what can we do?
You know, we hear a lot about growth mindset. Mm-hmm. I often talk about having a human mindset, you know, that human mind frame. A human mind frame acknowledges that story behind the student or the story behind our colleagues. We talk a lot in education about trying to acknowledge that invisible backpack. What are we wearing? What are we carrying that might be tough? What are we carrying that's exciting, that's triumphs, but also, because sometimes kids don't share those things, the good things that are happening in their lives, but also what are we carrying that's difficult? Mm-hmm. And so we really need to spend time asking ourselves those questions. What is the story behind the student and behind our colleagues as well?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think you're right. And I think it all, like we had said, ties into the whole emotional connection and the power and importance of having that emotional connection with our students, with ourselves, and kind of really grasping everything that goes along with it. And I love it.
And let's not forget, in regard to self-care, our need to emotionally connect with our own families, with our close friends or our extended families. We've got to practice that too and take time for that. Because so often, especially if you're teaching from home, you've got kids that are learning from home. It's all about school. And we need to take time to set that aside and say, you know, this dinner hour is designated, or this time, as soon as school's over from 3 to 4, we're going out and we're going on a nature walk. We're going to be with one another. Again, it goes back to what we say in the very beginning. It's our way of being with one another.
And I mean, you're absolutely right. If we think about that as the whole, the way of being, it kind of everything else falls underneath that, right? And if we can just focus on that, awesome. And all right, so I think what I want to do is we kind of talked about a few things with emotional connection, right? So just to kind of give an overview, we said that we want to choose our words intentionally, whether that means we're doing that, but behind the mask type of a thing, or however we choose our words, we want to make sure we do so intentionally.
And physical versus social. You got to remember that. Let's
yeah.
change. Let's get out there as educators and let's change that terminology. Let's encourage people to use the word physical distancing instead of social distancing.
Yeah, I like that too, because that's a good point, because you're right. We kind of think, oh, well, social distancing, and in the definition of that itself, it means we are distancing ourselves
from human beings. Yeah.
But I like that physical distancing is really what we're doing. Stay 6 feet apart. It's physical distance. So that's good. So that definitely comes into choose your words intentionally as well.
Yeah.
And I think even if we started saying that in the classroom, okay, we're going to physically distance today, we'll change the narrative as to how the kids will look at it as well. So I love it. That's good. Thanks for bringing that up again, because I didn't mention it, but that's part of choosing our words intentionally as well. And then the second thing you said was use expressive body language, right? So we want to make sure that we are expressive. We kind of express what we're feeling, especially now when a lot of what we're feeling is going to be hidden behind the mask or behind a screen. We want to make sure that we do that, and to get on that eye level with the kids, right? If they're little, literally get down, make that eye contact, or like I said, in my case, kneel down next as close as we can, so that we can use that expressive body language. And then you had said the third one was to practice empathy, which I agree, I think is so crucial. And there is a big difference between sympathy and empathy, and I really like that you had said that. But before we end today, is there any last bit? I like to always end with a last bit of advice, or any kind of wisdom that you would like to, or insight that you would like to tell everyone watching, that you would leave them with in regards to that emotional connection.
Yeah. Well, I think it goes back maybe to what I started with, which is, and I'll say this in my presentation on Friday as well, we are igniters of hope as educators. And if you're watching this, it doesn't matter if you're a teacher, a counselor, an administrator, a support staff. If you are striving to meet the needs of your students and families within your school community, you're an igniter of hope. You're an educator, and as an educator, you're an igniter of hope. And so first and foremost, if we're going to sustain that role, we got to take care of ourselves, right? And I'll talk about that on Friday, so don't miss it. But we also need to take care of each other, and we take care of ourselves and we take care of each other in regard to our colleagues. Then we're going to be better able to take care of our students and their families. And it really, emotional connection is a key that brings it all together.
Awesome. I love it. Now, I just had a question for you, Michelle, in case anyone that wants to connect with you, or find your book, if you could let us know a little bit about, I know you'd mentioned it, but if you want to tell us again what the title is, maybe a quick synopsis and where they could find that, and then how they can connect with you. That would be great.
Yeah, well, my email is right there, michelle@ignitinghopenow.com, and my website too is ignitinghopenow.com. And in regard to my book, I think in this moment, it too is incredibly important. It's a book about SEL, but it really comes through that lens of the way in which I teach as well, as a way of being. What is SEL as a way of being? We have got to start there. How can we, and in fact, the title is Start with the Heart, Igniting Hope in Schools Through Social Emotional Learning. And one of the things I often say is, how can we roll out SEL? How can we teach our students what the different competencies are if we don't understand them ourselves, and if we aren't practicing and modeling them ourselves? And when we get better about practicing and modeling SEL, then we're more able to take care of ourselves as well. Yeah. So it really truly is all interwoven. But the reason that the book's so important right now is because of that way of being piece. We don't need one more thing on our plate. We don't need to add anything, but we can reflect on what we have within us, and then we can practice some of that and emphasize some of what already lives inside. And that's what the book will help you to do, as well as providing really specific strategies for educator behaviors for SEL, as well as strategies for students. And you can find my book, Start with the Heart. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it with my publisher, Corwin, www.corwin.com. So it's out there. Put it into your Google search and you'll be able to find it. You can also get it on my website. So thank you, Chuck, and thank you for this summit. It's been amazing. Your speakers are phenomenal.
Oh, thank you.
I've learned so much.
I'm glad that you have liked it, and I can't wait for people to jump into your session on Friday. And if anyone here is watching and you haven't registered, I would say to go and register for free, teachersummit.com/ignitehope. So you can register for free and then check out Michelle's session on Friday, and tomorrow's a day filled with social emotional learning as well. So it's going to be exciting. So I want to thank you also for taking the time to talk to me tonight, but also to give a fantastic presentation for people to kind of take in as well, Michelle. So I really appreciate that. And I want to thanks again for coming on tonight. And yeah, I guess that we'll end our conversation here, but I know people will, if they're watching the replay here or the live, I would recommend that you go in and really practice these 3 points that we talked about today, because it is so important. So thank you again, Michelle. And
thank you, Chuck. I hope to see you all out there. I hope to see you on Friday.
All right. See you on Friday.
Take care.